Kia ora katoa, kia ora Aotearoa, kia ora Dr Wiliams, or let me also address you as Dr Warren Wiliams. Pleasure to have you on our show. This is Te Wiki, Aotearoa Māori, of course, Māori Language Week, and our show is a Kōrero Live, a variation of my original Yarn Live for this very special occasion where we celebrate Te reo Māori. So first of all, might I invite you to introduce yourself, and would you also please include in your introduction an understanding of what your doctorate is about for everybody, please?
Oh, kia ora. O tūtahi tēnā koe, Ryan. O tira koutou katoa e mā taki mai ana, e mihi ana ki a koutou katoa. Ko Warren Wiliams tōku ingoa, mo ngai tūhoi, me wai katoa oku iwi, te uruwera me Ngāti Mahanga oku hapu, te tōtara me te papaorotu oku marae. Engari, e tipu ake au i tūranga nui a kiwa, heoi, e noho ana au ki kirikiro i tēnei wā. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora. So my name is Warren Wiliams. Thank you very much, Ryan, for the invitation today. And for those who are watching, thank you for watching, and hopefully I can add some value to a conversation. E runga tēnei taumata. So my background obviously is in Māori technology and actually also in education. So your question around, I suppose, my research there, Ryan, it does dovetail into my real journey. So I was born and raised in Gisborne, came across to the Waikato to study at university, and fell into the computer science space. And in my years at the university, I noticed at the beginning there were quite a few Māori in the area, but as the years went by, the numbers seemed to diminish significantly. And so that kind of sparked something in me. And also in my professional career, same thing, there was very few Māori in the IT industry. So my research actually is, why were Māori not engaging with technology or in the IT industry as much? So my thesis is actually around increasing Māori participation in the IT industry. And how this relates to my real journey.
Huge.
It is very much so. And how this related to my real journey is the findings I made was around culture. How many Māori had to put their culture on hold, their reo on hold, for the things of providing food on the table, getting a job, paying the bills, all those kind of things. But in those kind of responsibilities you have, there's always a bit of a trade-off, and sadly, culture and reo was one of those. So I experienced a bit of that in my growing up. My whānau, I was lucky, my father was fluent in te reo Māori, that was his first language. However, he came from, or urbanised over to Gisborne, and of course English being prominent back in the 50s and 60s, he had to learn more English. So my first experience around reo was watching him learn English, and not losing so much, but less reo Māori and more English. And so for me, he didn't encourage me or my siblings to learn te reo Māori because of his own difficult journey of transitioning from a reo Māori world to an English speaking world. And so that wasn't one experience of me witnessing reo changing, being affected, I suppose, by urbanisation, things that people have to do, get a job and so forth. So I could see similarities in my research around why some Māori, why they weren't engaging in what's known as the IT industry. I did find, however, that there is a very strong Māori IT industry in Aotearoa New Zealand, and there is a huge uplift in not just reo, but tikanga Māori, Māori culture in all of its facets, and technology industry and many of the industries now. So a little bit of my reo journey there, how it started for me, how my father influenced me, not to teach me directly because he was put off it and actually said to me, I don't want you to learn reo Māori, I want you to learn, stay in the ways of English and Pākehā because of his own experiences. So fast forward through my education years, I was lucky enough to attend a school in Gisborne, which was building and strong in reo Māori, and then kind of picking up a few things, not very fluent in reo Māori in those days. It was the odd reo Māori classes and so forth. However, as I've kind of gotten older and supposedly wiser, I've learned there are some responsibilities as you grow older, not just for myself, but also my whānau, my family. And part of that responsibility is taking up the reo and culture and responsibilities to my marae and iwi and hapu. So living in the Waikato, I was very fortunate to participate and be part of environments that promoted and fostered reo Māori. And I'm also very fortunate to be active in my marae here in Waikato. I didn't take any formal classes of reo Māori until very late in my years. So when we say late, back in 2015, actually, 2015, 2016. But there was a time in my life, and possibly it happens with many others, that as Māori, there's this yearning, there's this internal yearning that you feel that, and sometimes a void that needs filling. And that's where I think the reo for me has been really helped complete me more and understanding. I'm still on a journey like many others, so I don't proclaim to be fluent in te reo Māori, but I try and support and promote and participate as much as possible in all the spaces that I occupy. So that's where my reo journey, my research, and I suppose the everyday kind of activities I have at the moment influence my reo, my culture, and where I am today. So quite a lot in there, Ryan. Hopefully that's been helpful for you and gives you a bit of sense of where I am at the moment.
Yeah, that's been amazing. Thank you for sharing so much. And if I bring it together, part of the intro that I didn't share, but people would have read or may not have read, but the opening line of the opening post was, why should I learn te reo Māori? Māori don't even speak te reo Māori. And it talks to the points you've just been sharing about what your father went through and what he shared to you in terms of encouraging you to learn English and live in an English world or English way. And going back into the history, for those that don't know, and it's just hearing it right now at this point in time, the New Zealand government had what's called the Native Schools Act of 1867, and it was to remove the use of Māori language. So if you spoke Māori, you would get beaten. And there are some, I think every Māori person will have those stories in their family, and through the friends of mine that have shared theirs, yes, from serious beatings that caused high levels of trauma, through to being ridiculed. That'll never take you anywhere. Don't need to learn Māori. And this is, I think, the bigger lesson, without getting too deep into it, is that people should be reflecting on how this trauma would affect them if it was them that had to go through it, and therefore how that should help them understand where Māori are at and have been at. And I'll add in my favourite little complaint is that over the years, the news media have put a really negative taint on all things Māori. So if you combine it all, the view that non-Māori have had of Māori has been tainted and programming them to be negative towards Māori. And then here are Māori who are trying to actually now learn their language, which was stripped from them, not through their own desire. So, yeah, wrapping that together with the fact that your father encouraged you to stick to English rather than Māori, and that you started formal lessons in 2015, which is just 7 years ago. So there's some, the history and your personal story coming together to help people understand where things are at, why they are the case, and putting it in a real personal sense, not something out of a textbook. So thank you.
If I can just add to that, just
please.
Starting, I suppose, starting a class or a reo Māori class is just that. It is the start. The journey itself has actually been really rewarding. The ups and downs, the mistakes, and for those who are just about to start their journey or on their journey, it's very, very intimidating and very scary. And one of the things I've learned from my journey is embrace the mistakes, be comfortable in the uncomfortable, because you're always going to make mistakes. I suppose as an adult, it feels a little bit harder when you're making mistakes, whereas it's strange when we're children, we're encouraged to make mistakes to learn. So, yeah, it's an interesting path. It's not easy, definitely, but I think it's just great seeing our language just thriving in so many spaces.
Yeah, that is true, and that's part of, I guess, the next question, because while you're on the show for the first time now, we did do this in 2020 with a range of Māori rangatira sharing their experience just as you have, and therefore the question still stands, because I feel that in the last few years things have really positively accelerated, and you just started to touch on it with the amount of use of te reo Māori, looking at even the news, and it's not just the use of Māori as a word like I might or still do, where I'll insert a word like I tautoko, that I support that. But you now see news presenters with their mako kawe, and you're just using te reo as readily as they use English. With I don't know the lady's name, but she is the weather presenter, and that's great to see her. She just rolls from English to te reo to English to te reo as she explains the weather. And for me, I just wanted to share that. I learned Italian by watching Friends, the TV show, spoken in Italian with English subtitles. So to see more te reo Māori in mainstream, and Shortland Street. So there's a lot of it in Shortland Street where they just speak te reo, but they also put the English subtitles. So it gives the opportunity for the viewer to, be able to go, they say that, it means this. I'm starting to, piece it together. But the more and more and more we see of it, whereas Shortland Street, I think, had its 30-year anniversary or 25-year anniversary, but it's only in the last year, I think, that we've seen that. So, yeah, some great examples. But what about yourself in terms of the various work and projects you've been involved in over the years? Is there any that you'd like to share about with regards to helping drive te reo of your own accord?
Yeah. I think in the spaces, so as mentioned before, I'm in technology business spaces. I'm very fortunate enough to be in governance roles as well. And the shift in the use of reo Māori is not just those moments of, I suppose, karakia at the beginning and end, and basic introductions, but I'm seeing more inclusion of te ao Māori in the mahi, in the work, in these various spaces, such as the tiriti work. So not just acknowledging te tiriti o Waitangi, but at policy level within these governance boards, advisory groups, all sorts of forums. It's now at that real policy operational level to how do we really embrace How do we really acknowledge? And so that recognition of culture, I feel naturally brings out reo Māori. You can't better express the concepts of te ao Māori without reo Māori, without the language. And I think it's just in New Zealand, it's an awesome time to embrace reo Māori. And I do tip my hat to those role models on TV. Like you say, I suppose the presenters, Orini Kaipara and others. It's so awesome that those role models are showing and being displayed in spaces, being confident in their culture and standing firm in their language in those spaces, that it just inspires the next generation and the current generation. And you can see that in all the content coming through, not just from our elders and Pakeke, but also our youth. So our tamariki, our shows that are reo Māori. I mean, this is so awesome. And many of us who travel overseas, this is natural when you go to other countries, other non-English speaking countries. You turn on the TV, the soap operas, the news are in other languages, and just the beauty of hearing that when you're overseas. So when I see, sadly, somewhat negative posts around reo Māori used in Aotearoa, and that maybe those not from Aotearoa have an issue with it, I feel quite sad that, trying to deprive those people of the beauty of our language and our culture. Whereas when we go overseas, we're exposed to their language and culture all the time. And it's amazing. So I can't see why we wouldn't want to embrace our own reo, our own culture in our country to share with the world. So, sorry, I am quite passionate about that. And so it does not frustrate me. Yeah, but it does confuse me, and I do feel it's probably from fear from many of their own personal journey, that people don't want to embrace it and so react in a certain way. Whereas when you're overseas and people are speaking their own language, you can hear the beauty, you can hear the feeling in that. And so
we just spoke about this a little bit with Kay Marie on this very subject, and I put forward the idea because I've been looking at it as well, right? So I learned French at school. It helped me learn Italian when I was on my away, and I was, I'll say, immersed in Croatian, Italian, French, Russian. What else was there? Spanish. And this was, I lived in an international community, and we all worked together and played together. But you talk about it, so why is Māori any different to Spanish, French, Italian, etc.? And my proposed idea that I'm going to explore and ask, so a friend who happens to be Ryan, I call him Ryan the Big Lion because he's very tall, but he happens to also be Māori and an organizational psychologist. So a good starting point. But I believe that the resistance to Māori here in New Zealand is not because as a human that's what they were born with, but that's what they were taught and programmed through the media portrayal of Māori and all the different elements that we could talk about for a long time. But I just use the negative portrayal of Māori over the years and all the negative news. It's almost programmed, like brainwashed people to have this negative perception towards anything Māori. So Kay Marie talked about the statement that pops up was, we don't want Māori shoved down our throat. It's kind of like the repeated comment on social media in different places. And it sort of talks to that, like the resistance for some reason. But just hypothesizing, because we need to tackle it in some way, I think, is the simple thing I'd like to say. But then I'll step back and be quiet because of what you think.
Yeah. I suppose for those of us who are learning te reo Māori, who promote te reo Māori and advocate for it, I think we just carry on. We continue to move forward. And not necessarily just for ourselves, but for those who come after us, our children, our mokopuna and so forth. If we fast forward, like as you know, of this week, 50 years ago was a huge momentous time for te reo Māori. If we were to fast forward 50 years from now, what would our mokopuna say about us in about 2022?
Yes.
So 50 years from now, you know, when we look on TV and we look on maybe even these series around the conversation around reo Māori, and our mokopuna in 50 years' time will look back and go and reflect on what we're doing. And we're now reflecting on the 50 years that have gone by. That's part of the responsibility, I think, these series and others, the celebration of reo Māori, has an impact for the future. Because I look at 50 years from now, what will my mokopuna, or many mokopuna from now, I suppose, will say about me and my time and what have I contributed to Aotearoa New Zealand, be it small, but some contribution. I would love Māori to be yes, there are statistics that Māori is not spoken as much as it should be or could be at this time, but I think we are in a time of movement and momentum, and we just need to keep embracing it, I think.
Beautiful point. A time of movement, and yes, and momentum. Absolutely. Like, I really feel in the last couple of years we have started to hit that hockey stick point. You know, yes, there's still racism and resistance, but as we've talked about, you know, seeing people wear their mokokai, presenting the news, the more and more use of it, not only in discussion and TV shows, but at the governance level in business and policy. And you know, it's a real heartwarming change, because at the core of it for me, you know, I guess it's an old cliche about lying straight in bed at night. How do you lie straight in bed at night? Which is a reference to, have you done right or have you done wrong? And if there's something that's wrong, even if it's not your fault, it's your responsibility to right it. So I look back at the history of New Zealand and the 1867 Native Schools Act. It is not a piece of our history I'm proud of. I can't do anything about that past, but what I can do is be active about our future. So here we are. I'm being active about creating a history that I can be proud of. And to take a really different example, look at Greta Thunberg, and how her very active approach to climate change has upset a lot of people. But here in New Zealand, a world away from Sweden, we had the day where, you know, hundreds of thousands of school kids protested. And that's to your point about the mokopuna. You know, what will they say? The children that haven't been born yet, but will look back and go, what did great granddad do? What did Koru do? Did nothing. Well, no, actually, you're doing a lot. So I think it's a beautiful point. Now, if we look towards the future, you know, there's lots happening, and we've talked about a few specific examples. But do you have anything more in your mind that you'd be willing to share, that you'd love to see happen, that would, you know, continue this step forward that you talk about, continue to build this momentum?
Yeah, I think so. There are many of us on different parts of society that are either huge influencers, have great responsibility, and are in decision-making tables. And I think many of them know the responsibility they hold to kind of drive Aotearoa New Zealand forward. But then there are other people who are just getting by through their daily lives, you know, looking after their families, you know, looking after their children, their businesses. But even their small contribution matters. And their contribution, and this is one of the things I'm really loving at the moment, is with social media, you're seeing many non-Māori engaging in the challenge of te reo Māori, as small as their own pepeha or introductions. And you can see that they've really tried, and they've really, but they've also put themselves out there. They've made themselves very vulnerable. And I think we need to, those of us in positions of responsibility and decision-making, we need to encourage that and support that. An example I can give, so the organisation I work with, we have a staff meeting like everyone else. And just the small part of celebrating Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, my Pacific Island staff members put together a video introducing themselves in Te Reo Māori. And they did a waiata in Māori. Now, majority of my workforce are non-Māori, but as the I'm not going to be the CEO. As the CEO, I was really touched. I wasn't expecting it.
Yeah.
It wasn't promoted. Just said, look, just send the video intro. But they had put together a presentation and put it at our staff meeting yesterday. Now it's those little things that we need to continue to support. And it wasn't initiated by me or anyone. They took the initiative to do that. And so those are the things that encourage me, that really encourage me for the future of Aotearoa, that many non-Māori are contributing to this movement, are contributing to this momentum. And I have lots of kōrero come back from those who are from Asian communities, from Arabic communities, and many other non-Māori communities. They're just embracing Te Reo Māori because they know with their own language how it gives them that sense of pride and belonging to where they are. And so if we are having that from other non-Māori communities, as New Zealanders, from Aotearoa, New Zealand, how can we not embrace this? But as business owners, as mums, dads, as teachers, lawyers, people in roles of responsibility, how can we not support and continue to advocate this? Because I think one of the questions you had earlier, or you'd sent me earlier there, Ryan, was in 2030, I think there's a target of 1 million speaking Te Reo Māori. I think, yes, totally. That is an awesome target, but I'm looking beyond that target. And for me, it's Aotearoa people embracing the language. If one could not get into the Māori versus non-Māori, the statistics and those who fall back into a quantitative, let's look at the statistics around who does speak Māori and who doesn't. To me personally, that is just a moment in time. I'm looking at the futures. If 1 million, 2 million, 3 million, whatever it is speaking Te Reo Māori, that is a good thing for Aotearoa. That is a good thing for the world. So, yeah, those are the examples I'm experiencing now, and as well as Māori taking up their own journey, their own identity, and embracing their culture. I think it's a great time to be in. There are pockets of society that disagree, as we know, but those aren't the pockets that I'm doing this for. The parts of society I'm doing this for are the future, children, mokopuna that are coming. That's who I'm doing it for, not for the ones who are struggling with their own personal feelings with reo Māori.
Yeah. And look, we've just had a comment come in that I'd like to pop up because it talks to what you talked about, and we have to sit up over the top of it. And also what I was just about to mention is that through the 2020 exercise, it encouraged me to research my ancestry, my Irish whakapapa, if you will. And I've actually been to the Auckland Irish Society and started getting more involved. I haven't been to my Irish lessons on a Monday night at 7 p.m., which are free to attend. There's a guy there, so it's not like there's anything in my barrier, in my way, except for me. And there's a little bit of that procrastination. I felt my own whakamā. But to come back to the positive is that what you talked about is that identity and that pride, which other non-Māori groups from Arab and other groups that you talked about shared and enjoyed with you. I'm now experiencing it in my own way with my Irish ancestry. And yeah, I remember being there for the first time among all these Irish people who immigrated to New Zealand. So, that I'm third generation Kiwi. So my great grandfather was Irish. So here I am, not even Irish, can't speak a word of Irish Gaelic, or can, but very badly, a couple of words. And yeah, I suddenly felt it. So it's that perfect scenario of until you've actually walked in another person's shoes, you can't experience what it's like. It's like, so the Māori and whakamā, Irish, I don't know the word for it, but we'll use whakamā for me. And comes to Matthew's point. He says, pepeha has been a wonderful journey for me to rediscover my whānau. For me, pepeha has been a beautiful gift from Māori to better learn about myself, as I did with my Irish ancestry, and deepen relationships with others. I agree that this kōrero and have attempted to share pepeha with many others and many cultures. So kind of brings together.
I think, one of the things I really enjoy, and I'll try not to generalize, but I'm pretty sure most Māori, when we hear a pepeha, especially from those from other countries, and they share about their mountains, their rivers, and albeit their waka might have been the plane they flew over on, or things like that, that's really beautiful to hear, because we just naturally kind of think, oh, wow, so that's the name of that place, and that's where that person. So I've heard pepeha from those from Ireland, from Wales, from India, Canada, the Pacific Islands as well, many of the Pacific Islands.
Wow.
And they've done their pepeha, but have related those parts, their mountains, their rivers, and so forth. And when you hear it, you just naturally kind of mentally do a geographic scan of where things are. And it's the beauty of that connection, and that as they're speaking, you're listening not just to the words, but you're connecting to them. And again, that's the beauty of language and culture, I think, that we should share more with people. There seems to be this focus on learning the words themselves rather than understanding the connections that they make when they're learning the language. I think that's more important. And then that's where what's known as the feeling comes out when someone's doing a whai kōrero or a mihi whakatau. Yes. You have those beginning journey that start off with probably the basics. But a really good orator knows how to connect the audience or the people or the kaupapa that they're at. So no doubt when you're at a hui there, Ryan, when you talk to people, you're connecting everybody in the room through your kōrero. And I think when you've got that with multiple languages in the room, it's a great thing. I get emotional about it when I see it. And I just say to people, I can't see why you wouldn't want to enjoy this.
Yep. Well, one of the subjects we haven't touched on, and we're just coming to an end, but I'll introduce a new subject off the back of what you're talking about. My first Palfrey experience was really emotional, and there's obviously that that sort of charge of atmosphere in the air, but there's also that charge of atmosphere in myself. I was a guest of the manuhiri, if I've got that right. Manuhiri is the guest. Tangata Whenua is the host. So this was one of our guests, Dan Te Whenua Walker, his Palfrey at Microsoft. And I was fortunate that I knew the tangata whenua because I happened to be Te Aoraha Grace, who spoke for tangata whenua, Ngāti Whātua Ōrakai. And for Dan Te Whenua, it was Kiwa Hammond. So I'm not sure if you know Kiwa, but he also happened to be on the TV show Kia Ora last night, Mike McRoberts' journey. And it was interesting because I was sitting there with my wife, who happens to be Māori, and I went, "Oh, that's Kiwa. That's my mate Kiwa." I hope I can say that, but I went through all the different bits and pieces. Like we had met online, we've been talking. The next thing I met Dan's Palfrey, and Kiwa was there, and you're talking about the oration, right? So I didn't know this at the beginning, but I know Te Aoraha is quite a colourful character. I knew Kiwa was by some of his LinkedIn comments, but meeting him in person. But like we talked about it afterwards, I said it was almost like theatre, and they're like, "Yes, that's what it's meant to be. We're meant to be telling a story. We're meant to be connecting. We're meant to be." And this is the bit, Wairua, which is spirit, and Tupuna, which is the ancestors, and in the Māori culture, the belief that you are able to access and communicate with your tupuna and gain guidance, safety, reassurance, etc. In some ways, if you compare it to Western or Christian, it's like praying to God, but in some ways it's communicating with it's not praying to God, it's communicating with your ancestors. And coming back to that first, like, I actually believe in that stuff. So I actually felt like there were other presence in the room, and I had chills going down my spine, my goosebumps, and I think my adrenaline gland was just pumping adrenaline. I was every time. So yeah, it's what's the right word? Spirit, not just spiritual, but it's a bigger than a spiritual experience. I think it. So yeah. Anyway, I would encourage people to make use of the opportunity if they ever get invited to be part of a tēnā pōwhiri, even if you sit there like I did for the first time, not knowing what was going on, and just sitting and listening to a lot of te reo I didn't understand at the time and still wouldn't, but would now be able to pick words and piece together an understanding. But the experience is a place to start, and that will bring you to life in terms of your te reo, I think.
I
just
totally support
on the close. So,
yeah. Sorry,
you go.
I totally support that. And for those who, again, back on the journey, make no mistake, those who are standing to do a whai kōrero are nervous, are very nervous. Unless you're a kaumātua who've been doing this for many years, the rest of us human beings are very nervous when we stand and do a whai kōrero. Māori mā, Pākehā mā, non-Māori. It doesn't matter, because it's such an important occasion. And also for those who play different roles at a pōwhiri. So yeah, don't feel that you're the only one sitting there nervous, or probably the heart beating is, but sweats and so forth. The adrenaline's running. It happens to everybody.
Yeah. Thank you. And we're just on closing, so I was going to just do a quick summary and give you the time to think of your closing remarks. I just also want to recognize Matthew Jackson has put a rather beautiful but also rather large question, which he does say maybe for next time. So we can look at that maybe through responding. So I'll pop it up here and read it out, and you will then see it. We won't try and tackle this now because it's a big discussion, I think. But his question is: I understand to be honoured as a kaitiaki means to care for the land. I'm wondering what connection there is between pepeha and how we relate to our local environment from the perspective of restoring biodiversity and restoring waterways. Perhaps a question for next time. But if you would like to share anything back to Matthew now, always feel welcome to.
Yes, tōtahi mihi atu kia koe Matthew, mō tō pātai kia māua. Just saying, great question. There are a number of Māori and non-Māori experts in this space who can definitely help with your pātai, your question. In the pepeha, there's a relation to maunga, to awa, to land spaces, and therein lies, I think, the connection that you're probably looking for your pātai. I think there's a whole nother web series there for you, Ryan.
Yeah, and I'll add to it my little piece of knowledge, which comes straight from Te Aotearoa, who I've mentioned before, and he raised the concept with me quite a few years ago about greeting the water, and I was like, why greet the water? And he said, well, in Māori culture, that's why we have it in our pepeha, because we are water and the water is us. It actually, our cells, cycle through the land and the water, and that is partly why we talk about it in our pepeha. So yes, I believe there would be a really strong connection to the guardianship, the kaitiakitanga of the land, and you'll see that in the it's started with New Zealand tourism, and it's been supported by Air New Zealand. So when you fly Air New Zealand, you'll see the message about kaitiakitanga and the guardianship of the land. And in some ways, if I put it in that old English cliche, which is take only photos and leave only footprints, it's part of the message with regards to that biodiversity. But let me take a moment just to sum up today and invite you to offer closing remarks. And I hope that sets Matthew off on his journey, because I know that he's he'll get intensely invested into that, and I think it's a great thing. So just to sum up, we've had Dr. Warren Wiliams here today as a guest, the first time on a Kōrero Live. So it's great to have some fresh faces onto the show. And we heard about his doctorate being around why there weren't more Māori in tech, and covered a range of the cultural challenges now, but how they link back to his childhood and some of the things that his father experienced and then shared with him. And the work that could be done around that space. And I forgot to ask at the time, but working with NZ Tech, I hope that they there's opportunity, or Te Mata Ora with Li Temu Temu, the Māori Tech Association, to put your work to further work, further value from it. Then we talked about the shift over recent years, and how it's not just words and sentences. It's actually now being used in governance, policies being written at a government level, but it's being more used in a more in-depth way rather than just a surface way, if I use my words there, to paraphrase. And then on to what we could see in the future. And, you talked about how a group of people at your work, without being prompted or pushed by you as the CEO or as Māori, put together a video of their own accord for Te Wiki Aotearoa Māori. And that's kind of like the embodiment of where the future needs to and will go, where non-Māori and Māori alike are supporting te reo. So with that, Warren, if you'd be able to give us your closing remarks, that'd be much appreciated.
Yeah. No, again, I think te reo Māori is on its way up and will continue on the trajectory. I think for us as role models, all of us who are role models, be it in positions of responsibility, decision makers, can contribute to that. And I think just encourage people to look to the future. There's the saying, are we being good ancestors? If you want to look to the future and the legacy that you leave today, have a look at what you're doing today with te reo Māori, and you can share that and know that in 50 years' time, when they look back, they can look back with you with a smile and pride in the legacy area. So, no reira, e mihi ana kia koutou katoa, e mātakitaki mai ana, kia koe e hoa Ryan, e mihi ana kia koe mō tō kouwhau, mō tō kōrero I runga I tēnei taumata. Kia ora.
Tēnā koe. So, tēnā rawa atu koe. I still stumble across it, but thank you very much is what that says. And really appreciate all your time, effort, input, Warren. And it's been really good to reconnect with you after all these years as well. It's been quite a while since we've actually had a kōrero. And then the last one was, not as, what's the right word? Because our last kōreros were important for what they were about, but such a meaningful kōrero today. So thank you so much to reconnect, and good to see you.
It's great to see you too.
All right.